let's take away the emotion, Mr. van Staden, from nationalization. Let's take away the hyperbole. And let's just consider the merits of the argument. This is historically a mining economy. Gold, platinum, diamonds, you could argue, are the resource and the birthright of South Africa's people. They should have a part in mining these resources. And if they can't do it through equity in mining companies, then nationalize them.
Yeah. I think that's a good argument. I think that there have been cases where people have argued, you know, that we need to do that. I mean, the Freedom Charter is quite explicit on the mineral wealth of South Africa belongs to all and live and work in her, etc., etc. I do think, though, however, that because of historical circumstances, I think it's going to be difficult to try and change things drastically now. But I do agree that there has to be a way found that you know, the people of South Africa can have some benefit flowing from the mineral wealth of the country. Whether or not nationalisation is that is the answer to that, I think is debatable.
Okay, well, obviously the government is looking at implementing a new mining charter, which has set revised targets on ownership within the next 5 years. So they're quite aggressive in terms of equity for mining companies, but that's one avenue to pursue ownership of the resources, black economic empowerment. If that exercise doesn't succeed, then people are talking about nationalization, and it doesn't have to be as drastic as the military entering a mine, taking over the keys and taking over the asset.
I don't think anyone in South Africa, including Julius Malema, is talking about a nationalization where you see that kind of activity. I think there's a general view of just what more equitable way can we look to share the wealth of the country. I think that there's a number of initiatives that government is undertaking at a political level. I'm not a mining expert, but certainly at a political level, there's a number of initiatives government is undertaking that are looking to do that, to promote you know, a greater share for the broader South African public in the mineral wealth of the country. I just have a concern with the equity issues because, you know, as Julius Malema and others in COSATU and elsewhere have pointed out, we just don't want another couple of instant millionaires. We need to have some kind of a system where there's a broad-based economic empowerment. Right. And I'm not quite sure how they're going to be able to do that.
What was decided at the last ANC conference, 2009 Polokwane, was to form a state mining company. And it's almost seen as the midway between BE and the black millionaires and no broad-based empowerment and this radical nationalization that's in the minds of people.
I think yes, it was. You know, at the Polokwane discussions in December of 2007, there was a lot of discussion about nationalization of the mines and how to share mineral wealth, etc. I'm not sure that the state-owned mining company is the way to go, because on the basis of what we've seen so far, we have a number of state-owned enterprises in South Africa, and none of them are working. They all appear to be inefficient. They all appear to be absorbing more resources than they can actually deliver in respect of, you know, the services they provide. So I'm not quite sure why a state mining companies would be any different. I'm also not quite sure how you're going to empower people, how you're going to get, you know, a broad-based entity inside that state structure.
I can see that you want to comment on this issue of a state mining company.
Yeah, I think it's a great point because, you know, if you look at the so-called parastatals, if you look at whether it's SAA, Transnet, you name it across the board, there seems to be overwhelming proof that government as an allocator of resources, it hasn't been an overwhelming success. Actually, to the point where you're looking at some of those entities need to privatize probably to become more efficient. So to go down this route, one has to wonder, is that wise? And what the benefit from that would be.
Okay, but we do have a country that seems to have instituted a model where the state leads investment, where the state owns the assets, and that's China. And a lot of what we see in terms of offshore investments in China are led by state-owned institutions. A lot of the assets that are invested in China are state-owned institutions. The capitalism that we see in China emerges at the helm of the state.
Yes, it does. But you know, to attempt to try and replicate the conditions that China has, you know, given China's historical context, I think it would be well nigh impossible. It's all very well to say, yes, but China does this, but China does that, and why can't South Africa follow suit? The reason is we can't follow suit is that we don't have the background that China has. China had a very tight state-controlled everything, a very tight, often and remaining so, oppressive political system, where there is not a great amount of civil liberty. So it's a completely different context. For South Africa to say now, well, that's a very good way for us to move, I think to try and duplicate, to try and replicate what China has done would be well nigh impossible now. And I think to attempt to do so, I think, would be quite disastrous.
Others who've also raised lessons to learn have mentioned Venezuela. And I know, before you jump out of your chair, the fact is, whatever Hugo Chavez has done, it may have distorted market values and principles and prices, but from reports, it's made a lot of Venezuelans very happy people.
Yes, initially it apparently made a lot of, a great many people in Venezuela very happy, but I think that, on more recent reports, I think the wheels in Venezuela are starting to come off. And that's because, that might not necessarily be because of the economic policies. There's a lot of political decisions that Chavez has made that are not particularly popular and are not particularly, particularly not beneficial to Venezuela. So it's difficult to say whether it's the nationalization of key industries in Venezuela that is the root cause of the growing resentment against him. It might be overtly political, but I think that's a valid point, that there certainly was a time, there certainly was a place when ordinary Venezuelans appeared to be benefiting from the nationalization policy. I think it's a case of how far you go with that, and at what point you say, well, maybe now we need to go into a more public-private partnership, perhaps, to get some expertise in it.
Yeah, no, just of interest on the topic too is what is the funding mechanism around it? You look at, the South African mines are certainly not as profitable as they used to be. When you look in a Venezuelan context, oil is a very different proposition to gold, that you have to mine sort of 4 or 5 kilometers down in terms of the capital that you need to put into it. And, I think it was Trevor Manuel who went on record of saying, where would we find the money to actually buy these mines back if we did that? It would come to trillions of rands, and this in the context of other initiatives going on, such as the NHI, which are going to require massive amounts of funding. And the question is, where does the money come from? If the mechanism is more aggressive than that and you don't pay market value, what knock-on effect does that have on investor confidence in the economy as a whole, when banking is another one that's sort of been mentioned as a target?
Gary, you use the very fashionable phrase of the 21st century, public-private partnerships. In the various models that can be pursued for nationalization, and I use the term loosely, is there a place for part state ownership, part commercial enterprise? I mean, we look at the whole funding of the new coal mine at Kusile. It's a state asset, essentially, but they're asking private players to come in and commercialize the entity and corporatize it.
Personally, I think that is generally the way to go. I think that we do need, and I think this is an important point to make, we actually do need to do something about wealth redistribution in South Africa, because we're sitting on a ticking time bomb here, and we really do have to find mechanisms, whereby we can make a more equitable, distribution of the wealth of the country, without taking from, necessarily grabbing from one and giving to the other. So I think the point to make is that we really do need to find mechanisms that are going to help us to redistribute wealth. Otherwise, we are going to run into a problem. We see signs of that on the margins of the political system already. And I think that perhaps the way to go is with that kind of initiative. I'm a bit reluctant to talk about too much state involvement in the economy, but certainly, okay, if the state is going to become involved, then it has to do that, I think, with some private expertise, and with even if it's just a fraction of a profit motive to drive people to actually make this organization work. I think that is a key principle, is that people sitting in state-owned enterprises really don't have anything other than, let's provide a valuable service to our people if we can. I think that you need to have some kind of an incentive, some kind of initiative, and I think that the private sector can provide that and provide valuable assistance to the state.
I mean, Andrew, we've just looked at how the United States and quantitative easing and bailouts have created a situation where the state intervenes, where the state regenerates a dying business, and then when it's sure that there's sustainability, it starts to pull back and lets corporate America come back to the fore.
That's the theory, but the reality is at the moment is, you've got massive balance sheet issues. There's a huge amounts of debts, and the question is, can they ever leverage from that? And I think that's the problem with it. Is in theory, yes, it will work, and you'll get to that point where it sort of all pays for itself. But in reality, does it work that way?